Hear the word of the Lord. Therefore, rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to you, O earth and sea, for the devil has come down to you in great wrath, because he knows that his time is short. And when the dragon saw that he had been thrown down to the earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. But the woman was given the 2 wings of the great eagle, so that she might fly from the serpent into the wilderness, to the place where she is to be nourished for a time, and times, and half a time. The serpent poured water like a river out of his mouth after the woman to sweep her away with a flood. But the earth came to the help of the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed the river that the dragon had poured from his mouth. Then the dragon became furious with the woman and went off to make war on the rest of her offspring, on those who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. And he stood on the sand of the sea.
Things were escalating to a fever pitch. Ever since Moses showed up here in Egypt, and when he talked to Pharaoh, life got harder for us. It was already almost unbearable, but when Moses showed up, now we had to find our own straw for bricks. And the quota was not lowered. This meant much longer hours and much more difficult working conditions. Still, you couldn't help but wonder what God was doing. There'd been so many signs and wonders. The water had been turned to blood. There'd been huge hailstones. There'd been thick darkness. There'd been frogs and gnats and flies and locusts. There'd been all these things had affected only the Egyptians and not us. They'd been plagued with boils. Their livestock had died. You had to be blind not to see these things. We were hopeful. Then we were called on to prepare a supper of roasted lamb, and we were told to use the blood and to paint it on the doorposts. That God was going to do something very big, and we wondered, was this the same as all the others? Where Pharaoh would just harden his heart and make life more difficult for us? But we went ahead with it. We did the supper just as we were told. But in the morning, something was very different. We could hear the Egyptians wailing and moaning. We found out that in every Egyptian home, the firstborn of every family had died. But in our homes, no one had died. Then the word rang out. Get ready to leave. We are leaving Egypt. We have been set free. The joy of that day was overwhelming. We put our meager belongings together and got ready to go. And we were shocked that the Egyptians were coming and they were loading us down with their precious metals and their jewelry of gold and silver. We weren't just leaving our lives of slavery. We were leaving in style. What a God. We were free. And so the Israelites left Egypt that day. But little did they know what awaited them. They thought that now that they had been freed and they'd seen all of these miracles, now surely they were on easy street. They would make the relatively short journey to the promised land, and they would get there, and they would live in a land of milk and honey, and they would live happily ever after. So why is it that we Christians think the same thing? We serve an all-powerful God who promises to take care of us. So shouldn't we be on easy street? But life is hard. Relationships are hard. Things don't work like they should. Work seems to be full of problems. The kids are tiring. They have a mind of their own. Life is hard. Why is it so hard? Well, in a nutshell, it's because the enemy is real and we're not home yet. We live in the wilderness. Let's not make the same mistake the Israelites made. Let's make a new mistake. The wilderness is a hard place, and we should expect it to be hard. But what I want us to see from our passage this morning is that the wilderness is also a place of beauty and goodness, just maybe not the way we think. Look at verse 13. And when the dragon saw that he had been thrown down to the earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. But the woman was given the 2 wings of the great eagle so that she might fly from the serpent into the wilderness to the place where she is to be nourished for a time and times and half a time. The wilderness is God's place of escape for us. Did you ever notice that before? But an escape from what? Well, it's an escape from the dragon or the serpent, Satan himself. We saw that imagery. And he's pursuing us. So we saw last week that he's a deceiver and he's an accuser, but that Jesus' victory over sin, death, and Satan means that he can no longer accuse us before the Father. Because now instead of his accusations in front of the Father, the Son, Lord Jesus Christ, is there making intercession for us. Those accusations are falling by the wayside. But he still pursues us to deceive us and to accuse us. It tells us here that he's furious with us. Verse 12, the devil has come down to you in great wrath because he knows that his time is short. In some ways, it's harder for us because he knows that he knows his days are numbered, and so he wants to do as much damage as he can before he knows that his doom is coming. Peter tells us in 1 Peter 5:8, your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. And so what is God's plan to protect us? That's the question here. What is his plan to protect us from the evil one? Well, there's this wonderful figure in verse 14. He puts us on eagle's wings. How wonderful is that? This eagle, this majestic bird that flies in the highest heights of the mountains, that catches the drafts, and just with outspread wings floats above it all. And he puts us on eagle's wings. What a wonderful thing. And so where does he take us? To the wilderness. What? That can't be right, can it? Surely the eagle would take us to safety up to his nest where we will be cared for, where they will drop grapes in our mouth and we will be able to play harps and we will sing and we will enjoy life forever and ever. Surely that's where he's taking us. But no, it says he's taking us to the wilderness. It seems so counterintuitive. He takes us into the barren, inhospitable, dangerous, easy to get lost in wilderness where anything can happen and we have no control of anything. Why would he do that? Here's the thing about God, okay? Here's the thing about God. His biggest commitment to us is to get us to see that we have no wisdom of our own, that we have no real effective strategies to deal with the evil one. The only real strategy is that he brings us to the end of ourselves so that we will depend on his wisdom, period. That's the Christian life. His commitment to us is so strong that he is there to get you to take your grip off of your love affair with our modern day comfort culture, so that you will see that your only hope in life and in death is the Lord Jesus Christ. And the only way to do that is to take us into the wilderness. And we balk at this. In Christianity Today, Barbara Mormon says the following: "It is curious to realize that people like you and me, who set such store by being settled and secure, should worship a God whose revelation was to nomads and wanderers. We try to domesticate God, try to get God to settle down with us, but never succeed. We have equated God's blessing with our comfort, but that's not how it works at all. God's blessing is the ability to trust him in the midst of the wilderness with the enemy in hot pursuit." That's exactly what Psalm 23 says. Sherry was sharing that with me this week. That's what Psalm 23 says. "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows." I'm anointed, I'm overflowing in the presence of the wilderness, in the presence of my enemies. See, God's blessing comes when we stop trusting in our own wisdom as if we knew anything about anything. In fact, beware when you know something about something, because then you become the self-proclaimed expert and no one can tell you anything. But real wisdom is to know that you don't have any, and that the wilderness is exactly where you need to be, because it is there in the barrenness with no food and no water and no protection that God provides. The children of Israel were nothing but complainers in the wilderness. They complained that they did not have enough food. So God sent them manna, where they could gather together these flakes and they could bake bread, and they did it for 42 years. He sustained them. They complained that they didn't have water, and time again, he provided water for them. God protected them. When they were worried about protection, God was with them in a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. He was their protection. They did not need the promised land. They had everything they needed right there in the wilderness. Brothers and sisters, we don't need the promised land. We have everything we need right now, mid-pandemic, mid-political unrest, mid-everything. We have everything we need, everything. He feeds us at a table in the presence of our enemies. It's only in the midst of the wilderness of broken relationships, of the difficulty of work, of the weariness of the daily grind, of the conflict that surrounds us, that he puts us on eagle's wings and he shows us who he is. From Isaiah 40, he gives power to the faint, and to him who has no might he increases strength. Even youths shall faint and be weary, and young men shall fall exhausted. But they who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. This is how we're protected by the enemy. We walk with him. But there's something else I want you to see here in this passage. It's in verse 15. It says this: "The serpent poured water like a river out of his mouth after the woman, to sweep her away with a flood." Really interesting imagery. Look at three words here: the serpent, the water, and the mouth. So the serpent, we've already decided, is Satan. It says he's the dragon, or he's the great serpent, looking back to the Garden of Eden, where the serpent, Satan entered the serpent and he tempted Eve and then Adam, and they ate of the fruit they were not supposed to eat. Water, to me, it's very interesting here that it uses the imagery of water. What could be more needed in the wilderness than water? See, it's a much desired commodity in a place where that's so arid, right? And of course, Satan would have his hands all over the water supply in the wilderness, right? This is his power, his seduction. If you're in the wilderness, you need water, right? And then the third one is the mouth. So the imagery here has to do with what he says. We've seen this before in the book of Revelation. Every time it's about the mouth, it's about what is being declared. And so we've already found out that he's a deceiver and he's an accuser. But this imagery brings a new dimension to the deception. So here's the point. Satan is bent on deception. But this new angle shows us that he deceives us in our greatest point of weakness by convincing us that he has what we need. This is why Israel worshiped Baal. He was the god of rain, and they needed rain for their crops. And it looked like the Philistines, everything was going great for them. And so the temptation to worship Baal so that he would bring them rain was very real. It's no different than what we're looking at here. He tempts us in our point of weakness. He knows what makes our hearts skip a beat. He knows what where we are prone to wander. He knows these things, and he tightens the screws on these things. And with all of this, he promises to bring us the water of life. And when he gives it to us, it makes us feel alive for a moment. But its end result is death and destruction. This is his ploy to suck us in and then to sweep us away with the flood. That's his ploy. There's so much subtlety in this. The only one that can give us blessing in the wilderness is God himself. And yet, the enemy has water. Something we desperately need. If you're in the wilderness, you need water. And so it's easy to shift your focus from the only one that can truly provide for your needs and put it on the thing that you think you need and go to all the providers you think have what you need. It's a subtle shift from looking to the one who can provide to suddenly putting it on yourself and deciding who's going to provide what you need. Do you see the subtle shift? You need water in both cases. God promises to provide, but your focus is not the water. Your focus is on God, that he will provide whatever you need. Suddenly the shift goes from focusing on God, now I'm focusing on the water. And this is what gets me off the path. This is what makes me move far, far away from God himself. What is the water that you have put your focus on? What is that need, that deep need that you feel that you have in your life that you're not willing to wait on God for? See, this is the water that the enemy promises. He says you have every right to make that decision. You're waiting on God, you're going to be waiting all day. You're going to be waiting forever. You're never going to get what he's saying. Does it sound familiar? It's exactly what happened in the Garden of Eden. And it's the same thing that happens to us over and over and over again. You don't need that. You can decide, hey, there's these other fountains of water. Look at that swimming pool right there. That is a beautiful place, and you can go there. What is it that you're looking to? What is taking your eyes off the provider and put it on the thing that he often provides? In an article For the Gospel Coalition, pastor and author Tim Keller offers this definition of sin. Sin isn't only doing bad things, it is more fundamentally making good things into ultimate things. Sin is building your life and meaning on anything, even a very good thing, more than on God. Whatever we build our life on will drive us and enslave us. Sin is primarily idolatry. And then he further develops this in his book, The Reason for God. And he shows the readers of the book, and if you haven't read that book, it's a really good book. He gives examples of particular kinds of brokenness and damage caused by idolatry. Look at these. If you center your life and identity on your spouse or partner, you will be emotionally dependent, jealous, and controlling. The other person's problems will be overwhelming to you. If you center your life and identity on your family and children, you will try to live your life through your children until they resent you or have no self of their own. At worst, you may abuse them when they displease you. If you center your life and identity on your work and career, you will be a driven workaholic and a boring, shallow person. At worst, you will lose family and friends, and if your career goes poorly, develop deep depression. If you center your life and identity on money and possessions, you'll be eaten up by worry and jealousy about money. You'll be willing to do unethical things to maintain your lifestyle, which will eventually blow up your life. If you center your life and identity on pleasure, gratification, and comfort, you will find yourself getting addicted to something. You will become chained to the escape strategies by which you avoid the harshness of life. If you center your life and identity on relationships and approval, you will be constantly overly hurt by criticism and thus always losing friends. You will fear confronting others and therefore will be a useless friend. If you center your life and identity on a noble cause, you will divide the world into good and bad and demonize your opponents. Ironically, you'll be controlled by your enemies. Without them, you have no purpose. If you center your life and identity on religion and morality, you will, if you are living up to your moral standards, be proud, self-righteous, and cruel. If you don't live up to your moral standards, your guilt will be utterly devastating. And on and on and on. The focus from the provider to the water. Brothers and sisters, this is why we need hardship in the wilderness. See, it's the wilderness that swallows up the water that might sweep us away. It's what it says there, that the earth swallowed up the water. In a world where the enemy pursues us and tempts us with the very things that we desire in order to destroy us, we should not resist the wilderness. We should not resist hardship. We should rejoice in sufferings and in difficulty, because it is in these situations that Jesus shines brightly. Here's the thing about Jesus. He knows all about the wilderness. He went through the wilderness, and it didn't go well for him. He went into the wilderness. The enemy tempted him. He did not succumb to temptation. But in the wilderness, the enemy was able to destroy him. He was placed on a cross, and he was brutally murdered. All that so that when we go in the wilderness, he walks with us. This is our ace in the hole against the one who would offer us false water, cesspool water, that when we drink it, maybe at first tastes sweet, but it turns sour. Jesus knows all about the wilderness, and he went there before us so that he could show us the way, and he does, and he walks with us, and he takes us to different oases where we can find water, where we can find grass, where we can feed our souls. One of my favorite Psalms is Psalm 24, and it talks about being in God's presence. But there's some curious verses right in the middle. Psalm 84 verse 5 says, "Blessed are those whose strength is in you, in whose heart are the highways to Zion. As they go through the valley of Baca, they make it a place of springs. The early rain also covers it with pools." The valley of Baca is a wilderness. But those who keep their eyes on Jesus, maybe you don't even know it, but you make the place where you are into pools so that others can come and drink deeply. Jesus told the woman at the well that if she drank from the water that he offered, she would never thirst again. Isn't that what we want? If we take matters into our own hands, we will be thirsty. If we look to the one who provides, we will not thirst again. Let me just say one final word about us and how we get to this. We can't do it on our own. When we talk about discipleship, some people immediately think, oh, we got to get a book and we got to work our way through a book. Well, it's not a bad thing necessarily. But I think discipleship is where we get together with someone else, or maybe in groups of threes, and we ask people to speak into our lives, to say, where am I putting my focus? Brother or sister, I see anxiety in your life. Where is your focus? What are you doing? Where are you going with this? The provider promises to put us on wings of eagles. Where are you with this? If you don't have a relationship like that, you need one. If you don't have a relationship like that, you are wandering in the wilderness on your own. You can't do this on your own. We have got to be involved in each other's lives. We have got to be in deeper relationship and not just talk about the football scores or about politics or about what's going on in the world. It can't be that. We must have deeper relationships. I want to urge you to do that because Jesus went through the wilderness for us. That's the gospel, and it changes everything. Let's pray.